My son's wife screamed at the waiter to remove me from their anniversary dinner. My son just nodded. The waiter looked shocked. I smiled calmly and said, "Fire them both." His jaw dropped because I was actually... Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The shock on Carlos's face that night will stay with me forever. But to understand why I had the power to fire my own son, you need to know who I really am. My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 68 years old, most people see me as just another gray-haired grandmother who should be knitting somewhere quiet. They see my gentle smile, my reading glasses hanging from a chain around my neck, and assume I'm harmless. They have no idea that beneath this unassuming exterior beats the heart of a woman who built a restaurant empire from absolutely nothing. 43 years ago, I was a young widow with 3 small children and a mountain of debt my late husband had hidden from me. David was only 5 then, clinging to my skirt as I stood in the doorway of a run-down diner on Route 66, holding the keys the bank was about to take away. That moment could have broken me. Instead, it forged me into something stronger. I rolled up my sleeves, put my babies in a playpen behind the counter, and worked 18-hour days turning that failing diner into the cornerstone of what would become Thompson's Family Restaurants. People often ask me how I did it, how a single mother with no business education built a chain of 37 restaurants across 3 states. The truth is simple. I treated every employee like family and every customer like a guest in my home. When Maria, one of my first waitresses, needed surgery, I paid for it myself even though I was barely making ends meet. When Tom, my dishwasher, wanted to go to culinary school, I created our company's first scholarship program. These weren't just business decisions. They were investments in people who would later become my regional managers, my head chefs, my family. David grew up in those restaurants. He did his homework in booth number 3 of the original diner. He learned to count by helping me organize receipts. On his 10th birthday, I taught him to make our signature apple pie, the one that food critics now drive hundreds of miles to taste. I thought I was teaching him more than just recipes. I thought I was teaching him values, loyalty, hard work, and the understanding that success means nothing if you achieve it by stepping on others. Every sacrifice I made was for my children. When other women my age were going to parties or taking vacations, I was negotiating with suppliers and training staff. I missed school plays to handle emergency shifts. I wore the same dress to 3 different weddings because every spare dollar went back into the business or into college funds. But I never complained, never resented it. Watching David graduate from business school debt-free, seeing him marry Jennifer in the garden of our flagship restaurant, those moments made every sacrifice worthwhile. Even now, when most people my age are retired and living in Florida, I still arrive at the original diner every morning at 5:30. Not because I have to anymore, but because I love it. I love greeting the regulars who've been coming for decades. I love the smell of fresh coffee and bacon. I love seeing the young servers I hired grow into confident professionals. This business isn't just my career. It's my life, my legacy, my gift to the world. But that night at the anniversary dinner, sitting at that elegantly set table, I realized that sometimes the people we sacrifice everything for can become the very ones who betray us. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm that I treasured more than any amount of money in our business accounts. Every morning, my alarm would softly chime at 5 o'clock, though truth be told, I was usually awake a few minutes before, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across my bedroom wall. Those quiet moments before the world woke up were mine alone, a peaceful bridge between sleep and the bustling day ahead. My morning routine was sacred. First, a cup of black coffee in my favorite mug, the one David made for me in 3rd grade art class with "World's Best Mom" painted in crooked letters. Then I'd dress in one of my simple business suits, nothing fancy, just professional enough to command respect while still being able to bus tables if needed. By 5:30, I was pulling into the parking lot of our original diner, the one that started it all, where the morning shift was just arriving. "Morning, Mrs. T," Roberto would call out from the kitchen, already prepping vegetables for the lunch rush. I knew Roberto's story like I knew all their stories. He'd started as a busboy 15 years ago, barely speaking English. Now he was our executive chef, with 2 kids in college. His daughter Maria was pre-med, and every time he mentioned her, his chest would swell with pride that matched my own. I'd spend the first hour reviewing the previous day's numbers from all 37 locations, but not in some cold corporate way. Each report told me a story. The downtown location had higher coffee sales on Tuesdays because of the teachers' morning meetings at the school across the street. The highway restaurant needed more pie because truckers had discovered our dessert menu. These weren't just statistics. They were the heartbeat of our family business. By 7, I was making my rounds, calling each location personally, not to micromanage, but to check in, to listen. "How's your mother's surgery recovery, Linda?" I'd ask our Phoenix manager. "Did your son make the baseball team, Marcus?" To our Denver supervisor. They'd tell me about staffing challenges, customer compliments, new menu ideas from their teams. I took notes on everything, especially the personal details that mattered. 3 times a week, I'd visit different locations, sometimes driving 2 hours each way. The corporate consultants Jennifer had hired last year said it was inefficient, that I should delegate more. But they didn't understand that showing up was everything. When employees saw me refilling coffee cups during a rush or helping a new server who was overwhelmed, it reminded them that we were all in this together. Sunday dinners with David and Jennifer had become the highlight of my week. I'd cook in my own kitchen, making David's favorite pot roast with the little potatoes he'd loved since childhood. Jennifer would bring wine, always something expensive that she'd mention cost more than most people's weekly groceries. We'd sit at my dining room table, the same one where David had done his homework all those years, and talk about the business, their travel plans, the grandchildren I hoped they'd have someday. Those Sunday evenings felt perfect. David would help with dishes like he did as a boy, telling me about his new marketing ideas. Jennifer would compliment my cooking, though she'd barely eat anything, always mentioning some new diet trend. Sometimes I'd catch David looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I told myself it was love, maybe mixed with concern for my age. I should have recognized it for what it was: guilt. The week before everything changed, I remember standing in my office, looking at our wall of photographs. 40 years of company picnics, grand openings, employee weddings, and celebrations. My life's work surrounded me in those frozen moments of joy. I touched the photo from David's first day as regional manager, both of us smiling so broadly. I had no idea that normal life was about to end, that everything I'd built with love was already being plotted against in secret meetings I knew nothing about. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on an ordinary Thursday afternoon in late September. I remember the date precisely because it was the day after Roberto's daughter got accepted into Johns Hopkins Medical School, and I'd brought champagne to celebrate with the kitchen staff. We were all laughing, toasting to Maria's future, when Jennifer walked into the original diner unexpectedly. She never visited the original location. In 5 years of marriage to David, I could count on one hand the times she'd stepped foot in what she called that greasy spoon, though she was happy enough to cash the checks it generated. But there she was, wearing a designer suit that cost more than most of my employees made in a month, her heels clicking against our worn linoleum floors with obvious distaste. "Margaret, we need to talk about your future," she announced, not bothering with a greeting. The celebrating staff members quickly dispersed, sensing the tension. She slid into the booth across from me, pulling out an iPad with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "David and I are concerned about you working these insane hours at your age. You should be enjoying retirement, not checking inventory at 6 in the morning." The words themselves weren't unusual. My daughter, Sarah, had said similar things, always with genuine worry in her voice. But Jennifer's tone was different. There was something calculating in her eyes, like a chess player who'd already planned 10 moves ahead. She pulled up articles about retirement communities, speaking about liquidating assets and maximizing value while the market is strong. When I mentioned that I loved working, that the restaurants were my life, she exchanged a look with someone through the window. David was sitting in their Mercedes, watching us. Why hadn't he come in? David never missed a chance to visit the original diner, always saying it reminded him of his childhood, but he sat out there like a getaway driver, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. When I waved at him, he barely lifted his hand in response, then suddenly became very interested in his phone. That night, I found myself unable to sleep. Jennifer's words echoing in my mind. Not the words about retirement, but the phrases she'd used: transition planning, succession timeline, optimal asset disbursement. This wasn't the language of a concerned daughter-in-law. This was corporate speak, the kind of terminology lawyers used when they were preparing for something significant. The following week, small things started adding up. David canceled our regular Tuesday morning breakfast meeting twice in a row, claiming Jennifer had scheduled important social engagements he'd forgotten about. My assistant Betty mentioned seeing David in the administrative office after hours, something he'd never done in his 15 years with the company. "He was looking through the filing cabinets," she said, puzzled. "Told me he was doing research for a new marketing campaign." Then there was the phone call I accidentally overheard. I'd arrived early to David's office for our rescheduled meeting and heard him through the door. "No, she won't suspect anything," he was saying. "Mother's too trusting. She still thinks this is about family, not business." My hand froze on the doorknob. Who was he talking to? What wouldn't I suspect? When I knocked and entered, David quickly ended his call, his face flushing red. "Mom, you're early." He shuffled papers on his desk frantically, covering what looked like property assessments. "Just finishing up with a vendor," he said. But vendors didn't make my son look guilty. Vendors didn't make him avoid eye contact with the mother who'd taught him that lies always show in your eyes. I left that meeting with a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with my age. Something was happening in my family, in my business. The two things I'd spent my life building were suddenly feeling unstable, like a table with one leg shorter than the others. You could ignore the wobble for a while, but eventually, everything would come crashing down. The human mind has an extraordinary ability to protect itself from painful truths. Like a mother convinced her child's fever is just a passing cold, I became an expert at explaining away every red flag that waved before my eyes. Each suspicious moment was carefully repackaged in my mind, wrapped in reasonable explanations that let me sleep at night. When Betty mentioned seeing David and Jennifer at Thornton & Associates, the law firm that specialized in corporate acquisitions, I told myself they were probably updating their own will. Young couples did that sort of thing now, planning ahead responsibly. When Jennifer had said they were there to protect the family's interests, I actually felt proud that they were being so thoughtful about their future. The way she'd quickly changed the subject when I asked for details? Well, estate planning was personal. I respected their privacy. The morning I found David logged into our financial systems at 3:47 a.m., reviewing profit margins and cash flow statements dating back 5 years, I convinced myself he was simply being diligent. "He's finally taking real interest in the operational side," I told Roberto when he asked why David had requested copies of all vendor contracts. "It's good that he wants to understand every aspect of the business. That's what a future leader does." Roberto had given me a strange look then, the same look my late husband used to give me when I was missing something obvious. But I dismissed it. Just like I dismissed the way conversations stopped when I entered rooms, how employees would exchange glances when David and Jennifer visited locations together, clipboard in hand, taking notes and photos like inspectors rather than family. Even my daughter Sarah tried to warn me during one of our phone calls. She lived in Seattle now, running her own architectural firm, far removed from the family business she'd never wanted any part of. "Mom, when's the last time David asked about your health without Jennifer present?" she'd asked. "When's the last time he visited just to visit, not to discuss business?" I'd laughed it off, making excuses that came too easily. David was busy. He was trying to balance work and marriage. Jennifer came from a different background. She didn't understand our family's casual way of doing things. When Sarah pointed out that Jennifer had been married to David for 5 years, plenty of time to understand our family culture, I changed the subject to her own children, my grandchildren I saw too rarely. The truth was, I needed to believe everything was fine. This business, this family, it was all I had left of the life I'd built with my late husband's memory. To acknowledge that something was wrong with David meant admitting that maybe I'd failed somewhere as a mother. Had I worked too much? Had I taught him about profit and loss, but forgotten to teach him about loyalty and love? One evening, I stood in my kitchen making David's favorite cookies, the chocolate chip ones with sea salt I'd perfected over the years. As I mixed the dough, I found myself crying, tears dropping into the bowl. But when I asked myself why I was crying, I couldn't answer, or wouldn't. Instead, I wiped my face, finished the cookies, and packaged them up for David just like I had when he was in college. When I dropped them off at his office the next day, his assistant seemed surprised to see me. "Oh, Mrs. Thompson, David's in a meeting with Jennifer and some gentlemen in suits. They've been in there all morning with instructions not to be disturbed." Through the frosted glass, I could see shapes moving, papers being signed, handshakes exchanged. The cookies grew cold in my hands as I stood there, still telling myself this was all normal business. Looking back, denial wasn't weakness. It was survival. Because somewhere deep in my heart, I think I knew that once I stopped denying the truth, everything I loved would shatter, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The truth has a way of forcing itself into the light, no matter how desperately we try to keep it buried. My moment of reckoning came on an unusually warm October afternoon when I decided to surprise David with lunch from his favorite Italian restaurant. I'd picked up his usual order, chicken parmesan with extra sauce, and headed to his office, hoping we could eat together like we used to when he was fresh out of college. His assistant Melanie wasn't at her desk, probably at lunch herself. David's office door was slightly ajar, and I could see his suit jacket draped over his chair, but no sign of him. I stepped inside to leave the food on his desk, planning to text him that lunch was waiting. That's when I saw the folder. It was sitting right there in plain sight, as if he'd been interrupted mid-review. The tab read, "Succession Planning, Confidential," in bold red letters. My hands trembled as I reached for it, every motherly instinct screaming at me to respect my son's privacy, while every business instinct demanded I look inside. The business instincts won. The first document was a mental capacity evaluation request form, partially filled out. My name was at the top, Margaret Ellen Thompson, age 68. The checklist of concerning behaviors made my blood run cold. Confusion about financial matters, yes, checked. Difficulty managing complex tasks, checked. Emotional instability, checked. Each lie was initialed DT, David Thompson. My own son had signed his initials next to fabrications about my mental state. Beneath that was a letter from Thornton & Associates, the law firm. "Dear Mr. Thompson, following our discussion about your mother's declining capacity and your concerns about the future of Thompson's family restaurants, we've prepared the following strategy for transition of ownership." I couldn't read further. My legs felt weak, and I had to sit down in David's chair, the one I'd bought him as a promotion gift. The next document was worse. It was a valuation report for all 37 restaurants with potential buyer information. 3 competing chains were listed, including Mega Foods Corporation, the soulless company that turned every restaurant into a carbon copy, firing long-term employees and replacing quality ingredients with frozen alternatives. Projected sale price, $48 million. Jennifer's handwriting was in the margins. Enough to retire at 35. My phone camera clicked photo after photo, my hands operating on autopilot while my heart shattered. There were emails printed between David and Jennifer discussing the old woman problem. That's what they called me. Not Mom, not Margaret, but the old woman problem. One email from Jennifer was particularly cruel. "She's had her time. If she won't step aside gracefully, we'll have to push. The anniversary dinner next month could be the perfect opportunity to show everyone she's lost it. The final document broke what was left of my heart. It was a drafted press release. Thompson's Family Restaurants announces leadership transition as founder steps down due to health concerns. They'd already written my resignation, painted me as a senile old woman who could no longer handle the pressures of business. They'd even included a quote from David about how difficult it was to watch his mother's decline and how he was ready to honor her legacy by bringing the company into the modern era. I carefully photographed every page, then placed the folder exactly as I'd found it. The Italian food sat untouched on the corner of the desk, its aroma now making me nauseous. As I walked out, Melanie was returning from lunch. "Oh, Mrs. Thompson, did David find you? He just went looking for you in the conference room." I managed a smile that felt like broken glass. "No, dear. Tell him I stopped by. His lunch is on his desk." I walked steadily to my car, waited until I was safely inside, then let the sob escape that I'd been holding since seeing my son's initials next to those lies. The evidence was undeniable now. My son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, was planning to destroy me. The anniversary dinner invitation arrived in a beautiful cream envelope with gold embossing, hand-delivered by Jennifer herself to my office. 5 years of marriage to your wonderful son, she'd gushed, actually hugging me for the first time in months. "We want you there more than anyone else, Mom. Reserved the private dining room at Chateau Bordeaux. 8 o'clock sharp. It wouldn't be a celebration without you." I should have known it was a trap. The hug that felt like Judas's kiss, the insistence that I attend even when I mentioned having a conference call that evening, the way David had called 3 times to confirm I was coming, his voice strangely tight. But despite the evidence I'd found, some part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was an explanation that didn't involve my son orchestrating my downfall. The restaurant was perfect, of course. Jennifer had exquisite taste when spending money that came from my restaurants. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over linen-covered tables. The private dining room overlooked the city lights, and for a moment standing in the doorway in my best dress, I let myself pretend this was real, that my son truly wanted to celebrate with his mother. David and Jennifer were already seated, along with 6 other couples I recognized as their country club friends. Not family, not old friends who'd known David since childhood, but the kind of people who measured worth in stock portfolios and vacation homes. Jennifer was holding court, her laughter tinkling like breaking glass as she regaled them with some story about their recent European trip. "Mother!" David stood when he saw me, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He kissed my cheek mechanically, his lips barely making contact. "We were starting to worry you wouldn't make it." I took my assigned seat, noting I was placed at the far end of the table, away from David and Jennifer, who sat at the center like royalty. The waiter, Carlos, appeared at my elbow. I'd known Carlos for 10 years. He'd started as a busboy at one of my restaurants while putting himself through college. Now he worked at this high-end establishment, and his warm smile was the only genuine thing in the room. The dinner progressed with forced conversation and Jennifer's increasingly loud observations about modern business practices and how some people just don't know when it's time to step aside. The other guests shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing an agenda they hadn't been warned about. Then, between the main course and dessert, Jennifer struck. She stood up, tapping her wine. Glass for attention, her voice carrying that false sweetness that always preceded cruelty. "Before we continue, there's something that needs to be addressed." She turned to me, her smile sharp as a blade. "Margaret, your confused behavior has become impossible to ignore. Showing up at offices at strange hours, forgetting important meetings, making decisions that don't make sense. It's embarrassing for David, for all of us." The room went silent. One woman gasped softly. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, watching my son's face. He was looking down at his plate, his jaw clenched. Jennifer continued, her voice rising. "You're ruining everything David has worked for. You're an embarrassment to the Thompson name." Then came the words that would echo in my nightmares. "Remove this old woman from our table. She doesn't belong here anymore. She doesn't belong anywhere in our lives or our business." She turned to Carlos, who had frozen mid-step while carrying a dessert tray. "You heard me. Get her out of here. This senile old woman is disrupting our celebration." Every eye in the room turned to David. This was his moment to defend his mother, to stand up to his wife, to show even a shred of the values I'd taught him. Instead, he lifted his head, looked Carlos directly in the eye, and nodded. A single deliberate nod that said, "Yes, remove my mother, the woman who gave me everything." Carlos stood frozen with the dessert tray, his eyes darting between David's cold nod and my eerily calm expression. In that moment of devastating silence, I saw everything with perfect clarity. This wasn't just a cruel daughter-in-law trying to push out her mother-in-law. This was a calculated corporate assassination, and the weapon aimed at my heart had been forged long before tonight. "Carlos," I said quietly, my voice steady as granite, "please set down the tray and bring me my phone from my coat. There's something everyone here needs to see." Jennifer's face flushed red. "Don't you dare enable her delusions. David, tell him." But Carlos, loyal Carlos, who remembered when I'd paid for his mother's cancer treatment, was already moving. As he handed me my phone, I pulled up the photographs I'd been investigating since finding that folder. The deeper I dug, the more horrifying the conspiracy had become. 3 months ago, I began, my voice carrying the authority of 40 years of business leadership. David and Jennifer began meeting with Richard Brennan, CEO of Mega Foods Corporation. I showed the screen to the stunned dinner guests. Security footage from our corporate office shows them entering together on 7 different occasions, always after hours. David's face had gone white. "Mother, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I swiped to the next image. "This is a contract draft, David. Your signature is on page 12, agreeing to a hostile takeover once you've had me declared mentally incompetent. $48 million. But that's not even the worst part." The other dinner guests were leaning away from David and Jennifer now, as if betrayal might be contagious. I continued, each word precise and devastating. "Mega Foods plans to immediately terminate all employees over 50. That's 137 people, some who've been with us for decades. Roberto, who's putting both kids through college. Betty, who's supporting her disabled husband. They'll all be replaced with minimum wage workers with no benefits." Jennifer tried to interject, but I raised my hand and surprisingly, she fell silent. "There's more. They plan to sell 23 of our locations to developers. The original diner, the one where David took his first steps, where his father proposed to me, will be demolished for a shopping complex. Every family recipe will be replaced with frozen, mass-produced alternatives. Our signature apple pie, the one food critics drive hours for, gone." I pulled up an email exchange that my IT manager had helped me recover. This email from Jennifer to Richard Brennan explicitly states, "The old woman's sentimental attachment to employees is the biggest obstacle. Once she's removed, we can clean house without resistance." One of the country club wives gasped, "Jennifer, how could you?" But I wasn't finished. The conspiracy went even deeper. "They've been poisoning the board against me for months, fabricating incidents that never happened. David told board member Patricia Wright that I'd forgotten her name 3 times in one meeting. Patricia called me yesterday, David. She was very concerned. Imagine her surprise when I recited not only her name, but her grandson's birthday and his favorite item on our kids' menu." The documentation was overwhelming. They'd consulted with 3 different law firms about conservatorship laws. They'd had private investigators following me, trying to catch me in moments of normal human forgetfulness that could be twisted into signs of dementia. They'd even created a fake medical report, though thankfully hadn't been foolish enough to submit it officially yet. The anniversary dinner, I said, looking directly at my son, was meant to be the final act. Public humiliation in front of witnesses who could testify to my erratic behavior and mental decline. You needed credible people to say they saw me removed from a restaurant for being disruptive and confused. David's hands were shaking now. Jennifer had gone silent, her perfectly made-up face frozen in shock that her plan had been so thoroughly exposed. The other guests sat in stunned silence, witnesses to a family tragedy they'd never asked to be part of. I maintained my composure long enough to leave that restaurant with dignity, my head held high as I walked past the stunned faces and Jennifer's sputtering attempts at denial. Carlos walked me to my car, his hand gently on my elbow, neither of us speaking because what was there to say? I managed to drive the 20 minutes home on autopilot, muscle memory navigating familiar streets while my mind floated somewhere outside my body, unable to process what had just happened. But the moment I closed my front door behind me, the dam broke. I collapsed onto my living room floor, my legs simply giving out as 40 years of sacrifice crashed down on me in waves of unbearable grief. The sobs that tore from my throat didn't even sound human. They were the sounds of a mother whose heart had been ripped out by the child she'd given everything to protect. Every memory became a weapon against me. David's first day of kindergarten, when he'd clung to my leg crying, begging me not to leave him. I'd promised him then that Mommy would always protect him, always be there for him. How had that frightened little boy become the man who just tried to destroy me? I crawled to the bookshelf, pulling down photo album after photo album, torturing myself with evidence of a love I thought was unbreakable. Here was David at 8, covered in flour from head to toe, grinning as we made his birthday cake together in the restaurant kitchen. He'd insisted on helping, even though he'd made a terrible mess. "When I grow up, I'm going to run all the restaurants with you, Mommy," he'd declared, his gap-toothed smile bright with certainty. "We'll be partners forever and ever." The photo from his high school graduation swam before my tear-blurred eyes. I'd worked 3 double shifts to buy him that class ring he'd wanted so desperately. My feet had been so swollen that night I could barely stand, but I'd stood anyway, cheering the loudest when they called his name. He'd run to me afterward, lifting me off my feet in a bear hug, whispering, "I owe everything to you, Mom." Did he remember the night his father died? He was only 5, but surely somewhere in his mind lived the memory of me holding him as we both cried, promising him that even though Daddy was gone, Mommy would make sure he had everything he needed. I'd kept that promise. God, how I'd kept it. Every school play attended despite exhaustion, every baseball game cheered at, every disappointment soothed, every success celebrated. The wedding photos felt like mockery now. My son, so handsome in his tuxedo, dancing with me to "A Song for Mama" by Boys II Men. He'd chosen that song specifically, tearing up as he told the wedding guests, "Everything I am is because of this incredible woman." Jennifer had watched from the head table, her smile tight even then. Had she already been calculating my worth, planning my disposal? I found myself in David's old room, untouched since he'd moved out 15 years ago. His baseball trophies still lined the shelf. His college acceptance letter was still framed on the wall, the one that had made me cry with pride. On his desk sat the business card holder I'd given him when he joined the company. David Thompson, future CEO. It read, a promise I'd made and intended to keep. The cruelest memory came unbidden. Last Mother's Day, just 5 months ago. David had surprised me with breakfast in bed and a handmade card like he used to make as a child. Inside, in his adult handwriting, he'd written, "To the woman who taught me everything about business and even more about love." Had he already been planning my destruction as he wrote those words? Was Jennifer perhaps standing behind him, smirking at my gullible, motherly heart? I don't know how long I laid on his childhood bed, crying until I had no tears left, then crying dry, soundless sobs that shook my entire body. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a negation of everything I'd built my life around. If my love for my son could be repaid with such cruelty, what did any of it mean? Dawn was breaking through David's childhood bedroom window when I finally stopped crying. My body ached from lying curled in a ball for hours. My throat was raw and my eyes felt like sandpaper. I sat up slowly, catching my reflection in the mirror attached to his old dresser. The woman staring back at me looked destroyed. Red eyes, hollow cheeks, hair in disarray. For a moment I didn't recognize myself. Then I looked closer. Behind the tears and exhaustion, I saw something else. The same steel that had been there when the bank tried to foreclose on the diner 43 years ago. The same determination that had driven me to work 18-hour days with 3 babies depending on me. The same fierce spirit that had built an empire from a failing restaurant. David and Jennifer had broken my heart, but they had made one crucial miscalculation. They'd forgotten who I really was beneath the grandmother exterior. I stood up, straightening my dress, and walked to the bathroom. The cold water on my face was like a baptism, washing away the grieving mother and revealing the fighter underneath. As I patted my face dry, I heard my late husband's voice in my memory, something he'd told me when we were first married and struggling. "Margaret, honey, the wolves don't care if the shepherd is tired. You protect what's yours, no matter what." The restaurants weren't just buildings and profit margins. They were Roberto's children's college funds. They were Betty's mortgage payments. They were the single mothers I'd hired when no one else would, the former addicts I'd given second chances to, the immigrants who'd found their American dream in my kitchens. David and Jennifer wanted to sell all of that to Mega Foods for 30 pieces of silver, destroying lives for their early retirement. I walked downstairs to my home office, each step more determined than the last. On my desk was a photo from last year's company picnic. Over 200 employees and their families, all wearing matching Thompson's Family Restaurants t-shirts, all smiling. My real family. The one that had never betrayed me, never plotted against me, never called me the old woman problem. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Martha Sullivan. Martha was the best corporate attorney in 3 states, and more importantly, one of my first customers from 40 years ago. She'd been a struggling law student then, and I'd let her run a tab for months, feeding her when she couldn't afford to eat. She answered on the second ring, despite it being 6 in the morning. "Margaret, what's wrong?" "Martha, I need you to clear your calendar. I'm about to go to war with my son, and I need the best general I can find." There was a pause. Then Martha's voice came back, sharp as a blade. "I'll be at your house in an hour. Put on coffee." Next, I called Frank Rodriguez, my most trusted board member and godfather to David. His disappointment in David would be immense, but I needed allies who knew the truth. Then Patricia Wright, who was still furious about David's lies concerning my supposed memory issues. One by one, I assembled my army. As I made those calls, something shifted inside me. The tears dried completely, replaced by a cold, calculated determination I hadn't felt in years. David thought he knew his mother, the sweet, giving woman who'd always put him first, but that mother had died on a restaurant floor the night before when he nodded for my removal. What remained was the businesswoman who'd crushed competitors, negotiated with suppliers twice her size, and built something from nothing. I looked at that family photo one more time, then turned it face down. "You want the company, David?" I said to the empty room, my voice steady and dangerous. "You'll have to take it from me. And son, I've been fighting longer than you've been alive." Martha arrived with her war face on, carrying 2 briefcases and a laptop bag. By the time she left 3 hours later, we had constructed a strategy so airtight that David and Jennifer would never see it coming. The beautiful irony was that my son had taught me himself to never show your cards until you're ready to take the entire pot. The first step was documenting everything. I'd already photographed the damning folder from David's office, but Martha wanted more. We need to be surgical, Margaret. No emotion, just facts. We pulled corporate bylaws from 1982, the year I'd incorporated. Back then, on the advice of my late husband's friend who was a lawyer, I'd built in a fail-safe clause that even I had forgotten about. The founder, that's me, retained veto power over any sale or major restructuring as long as I owned at least 10% of the company. David owned 30%, but I still held 55%. He couldn't sell a single napkin without my signature. The second revelation came from my IT manager, Kevin, who I'd quietly asked to preserve all company emails 2 weeks prior when my suspicions first arose. "Mrs. T, you're not going to believe this," he said, pulling up deleted correspondence. David had been sloppy, thinking deleted meant gone forever. Kevin recovered everything. Negotiations with Mega Foods, discussions about managing the mother situation, even Jennifer's research into power of attorney laws. Most damaging was an email thread where David explicitly stated I was sharp as ever, but they needed to create the narrative of decline. I hired a private investigator, someone Martha recommended who specialized in corporate espionage. Within a week, he had photographs of David and Jennifer meeting with Mega Foods executives at a private club. He also discovered something that made my stomach turn. They'd already received a good faith deposit of $200,000 from Mega Foods, hidden in an offshore account. They'd literally taken a down payment on my life's work. The fourth phase was the most delicate. I needed the board on my side, but I couldn't appear vindictive. I met with each member individually, presenting the evidence with calm professionalism. Frank Rodriguez actually cried when he saw the proof. "That boy was like my own son," he said, shaking his head. "How could he do this to you?" Patricia Wright was less sentimental and more furious. "I knew something was off when he lied about your memory. You remember my dog's name from 15 years ago, for God's sake." While building my corporate defense, I also prepared a more personal trap. I scheduled the annual all-hands meeting for November 15th, 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner fiasco. This meeting was a tradition. All restaurant managers and key employees gathered to review the year and plan ahead. David and Jennifer would have to attend. Their absence would raise too many questions. But they had no idea what I had planned. I also made a crucial phone call to Richard Brennan at Mega Foods. "Mr. Brennan, this is Margaret Thompson. I understand you've been speaking with my son about acquiring our restaurants." His shocked silence told me everything. "I think we should meet. I might be interested in selling after all." The greed in his voice was palpable as we scheduled lunch for the day before the all-hands meeting. Finally, the masterstroke. Carlos, the waiter from that horrible night, wasn't just any waiter. He was completing his law degree, and I'd been secretly paying his tuition. When I'd asked him 6 months ago to take that high-end restaurant job and watch David and Jennifer for me, he'd agreed immediately. "You saved my family, Mrs. T. I'd do anything for you." He'd recorded everything from that anniversary dinner on his phone. Every cruel word, David's nod of betrayal, Jennifer's venomous attack. As I reviewed my plan with Martha one final time, she smiled grimly. "They wanted to paint you as senile and helpless. Instead, they're about to learn what 40 years of business warfare teaches you." The morning of November 15th arrived with unusual November sunshine, as if nature itself had decided to spotlight the drama about to unfold. The grand ballroom at the Marriott downtown was packed with over 200 people, restaurant managers, executive staff, key employees from all 37 locations. The energy in the room buzzed with the usual excitement of our annual meeting, but underneath, there was something else. Whispers, glances. The rumor mill had been churning since the anniversary dinner, and everyone knew something significant was coming. I stood at the side entrance, watching the room fill up. I deliberately arrived early, greeting each person by name, shaking hands, asking about their families. "Mrs. T, you look radiant," said Maria from the Phoenix location. If only she knew I'd barely slept in 3 weeks, running on pure adrenaline and righteous fury. But I did look good. I'd chosen my sharpest business suit, had my hair professionally styled, and my makeup applied with precision. Image mattered today. I needed to look like the competent leader I was, not the confused old woman David and Jennifer had tried to paint me as. David and Jennifer arrived 30 minutes late, a calculated move to make an entrance. She wore a designer suit that screamed new money, while David looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes suggesting his own sleepless nights. They tried to project confidence as they walked to their seats at the front table, but I caught David's hands trembling as he pulled out Jennifer's chair. He knew something was off. The room was too quiet, the employees too watchful. "David, Jennifer, so glad you could make it," I said warmly, my smile perfectly professional. Jennifer's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but she had no choice but to smile back. The other board members were already seated at the main table, their faces carefully neutral. Frank Rodriguez wouldn't even look at David, while Patricia Wright's jaw was clenched so tight I worried for her dental work. As I took the podium, the room fell completely silent. 200 pairs of eyes fixed on me, waiting. Behind me, the projection screen displayed our company logo, the one I'd designed myself 43 years ago, a simple drawing of a diner with a heart worked into the roof. Home and love, the two things I'd tried to build into every restaurant. "Good morning, family," I began, and saw David flinch at the word. "Before we begin our usual business, I need to address some concerns about leadership transition that have been raised in recent weeks." Jennifer shifted in her seat, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. She whispered something urgently to David, who shook his head slightly. I clicked the first slide, a photo from our company picnic, all of us together, smiling. For 43 years, Thompson's Family Restaurants has been more than a business. It's been a promise to our employees that they would always have a safe place to work, fair wages and respect. A promise to our customers that they would always receive quality food made with care. A promise to our communities that we would always be there, supporting local causes, hiring local people, being good neighbors. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Roberto stood at the back, his arms crossed, his chef's whites pristine. Betty sat with the other administrative staff, her hand over her heart. These people knew something momentous was happening. "Recently," I continued, my voice steady as steel, "it's come to my attention that not everyone in this room shares those values, that some people see our employees not as family, but as expendable numbers on a spreadsheet, that some people see our recipes, perfected over decades, as unnecessary expenses to be replaced with frozen alternatives." David's face had gone pale. Jennifer was typing frantically on her phone, probably texting their lawyer. I smiled internally. Their lawyer wouldn't help them now. Martha had made sure of that. "Before we discuss the future of Thompson's Family Restaurants," I said, clicking to the next slide, "I'd like to share a recording from October 23rd at Chateau Bordeaux. Some of you may have heard rumors about this evening. Let me show you the truth." The giant screen behind me came to life with Carlos's video. The image was crystal clear, the audio perfect. There was Jennifer standing in her designer dress, her voice dripping with venom. "Remove this old woman from our table. She doesn't belong here anymore." Then David's face, cold and dismissive, giving that horrible nod of agreement. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. Someone dropped a coffee cup, the crash punctuating the shocked silence that followed. "That's taken out of context," Jennifer shouted, jumping to her feet. But I was already clicking to the next slide, the email where she called me the old woman problem. Then David's signed mental capacity evaluation form with its fabricated symptoms. Then the contract draft with Megafoods. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow. Mr. Richard Brennan from Megafoods was very chatty during our lunch yesterday. I continued conversationally. He was under the impression that David had the authority to sell. Imagine his surprise when I showed him the corporate bylaws. He was even more surprised to learn about the $200,000 good faith deposit already paid to an offshore account. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division found that particularly interesting. David stood up so fast his chair fell backward. Mother, you don't understand. Oh, but I do understand, son. My voice carried 40 years of authority. I understand that you plan to fire everyone over 50. Roberto, would you like to stand up? Roberto stood, his face grave. 22 years with us. His daughter Maria just started at Johns Hopkins Medical School. Under your deal with Megafoods, he'd be terminated within 90 days. One by one, I called out names: Betty, Marcus, Linda. Each person stood as I told their story, their years of service, what they'd lose if the sale went through. By the time 30 people were standing, many in the room were crying. These weren't just employees. They were family members watching other family members being marked for termination. But here's the part that makes this even more interesting, I said, savoring the moment. Carlos, would you please come forward? Carlos walked to the front in his finest suit, no longer the subservient waiter, but a confident young attorney. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carlos Mendoza, and I'm not actually a waiter. I completed my law degree last year thanks to Mrs. Thompson's sponsorship. For the past 6 months, I've been working undercover at Chateau Bordeaux at Mrs. Thompson's request, documenting David and Jennifer's meetings with corporate raiders. Jennifer's face went from red to white to green. That's entrapment. That's illegal. Actually, Carlos said calmly, it's called due diligence. And everything I witnessed was in public spaces with no expectation of privacy. Very legal, very admissible in court. But I wasn't done with the revelations. There's one more thing. David, you've been telling people I'm showing signs of dementia, so I took your advice and got evaluated. 3 separate neurologists, all the cognitive tests you could imagine. I clicked to the final slide, the medical reports. Perfect cognitive function, above average, actually for someone my age. One doctor wrote that I have exceptional mental acuity and business acumen. Funny how different real medical opinions are from the fictional ones you created. The room was in complete upheaval now. Board members were conferring urgently. Employees were recording everything on their phones. David stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally, horrible realization of how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. There's one last piece of business, I announced. Effective immediately, David Thompson is terminated from all positions within Thompson's family restaurants for breach of fiduciary duty, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Jennifer Thompson is permanently banned from all properties. Security is waiting outside to escort them out. The twist was complete. The son who'd tried to destroy me was himself destroyed, not by emotion or anger, but by careful planning and irrefutable evidence. The security team I'd hired stood quietly by the ballroom doors as David and Jennifer gathered their things in stunned silence. The room watched in a mixture of shock and satisfaction as my son, the would-be corporate raider, was escorted from his own termination. He turned back once, his eyes meeting mine across the room, and for just a moment, I saw the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees. But that boy had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. The Megafoods deal is dead, I announced once the doors closed behind them. Richard Brennan received a cease and desist letter this morning, and the FBI is investigating the illegal deposit. That money will be recovered and donated to our employee emergency fund. A cheer went up from the crowd, Roberto leading the applause. Over the following weeks, David tried everything. First came the lawyers, 3 different firms attempting to challenge his termination. Martha dismantled each attempt with surgical precision. The corporate bylaws were clear, the evidence overwhelming. Then came the emotional manipulation. Voicemails at 2 a.m., crying about how Jennifer had influenced him, how he'd made a mistake, how he was still my son. I changed my phone number. The investigation revealed more than even I had expected. Jennifer had been the mastermind, but David was far from innocent. They'd been planning this for 18 months. slowly poisoning relationships, building their case for my incompetence. They'd even paid a cousin of Jennifer's who worked at a nursing home to create fake documentation about dementia facilities in preparation for Margaret's inevitable decline. 6 months passed. The restaurants didn't just survive, they thrived. Freed from the constant threat of corporate vultures, our employees worked with renewed passion. I promoted Roberto to Executive Vice President of Operations. Betty became Chief Financial Officer. The people who'd stood to lose everything under David's plan were now running the company they'd helped build. Sales increased by 15%. We opened 2 new locations. The employee ownership program I established meant that when I eventually did retire, the company would belong to the people who actually loved it. No outside corporation could ever swallow us whole. Every employee with 5 years or more of service received shares. The janitor who'd been with us for 20 years now owned a piece of what he'd helped create. I heard about David and Jennifer through the grapevine. The FBI investigation had destroyed their reputation in the business community. Jennifer left him 3 months after the meeting, taking half of their assets in the divorce. She moved to California, trying to reinvent herself. David lost their house, the cars, everything purchased with the anticipation of that $48 million windfall. Last I heard, he was working as a middle manager at a logistics company in Ohio. My daughter Sarah flew in from Seattle with her children for my 70th birthday celebration at the Original Diner. "Mom," she said, holding my hand across the same booth where I'd once done payroll with babies and playpens, "I'm proud of you. Not for building this empire, but for protecting it, for choosing the people who chose you." Frank Rodriguez retired from the board, but still came for coffee every Wednesday at the original location. "You know, Margaret," he said one morning, "I watched David grow up. Somewhere along the way, he forgot that money isn't the goal. It's just the tool. You build wealth to take care of people, not to destroy them." The Original Diner still stands, still serves the famous apple pie, still employs people who need second chances. Roberto's daughter graduated from medical school and gave a speech thanking the Thompson's family restaurant family for making her dreams possible. Betty's disabled husband got the experimental treatment they couldn't have afforded before her promotion. As for me, I still arrive at 5:30 a.m., not because I have to, but because I want to. Because this isn't just a business. It's proof that loyalty, hard work, and treating people with dignity will always triumph over greed. The morning sun streams through the windows of my Original Diner as I write this, sitting in booth number 3 where David once did his homework. It's been a year since that awful anniversary dinner, since the night my son tried to destroy everything I'd built and instead destroyed himself. The coffee is fresh, Roberto's breakfast rush is in full swing, and the familiar sounds of clinking plates and friendly conversation fill the air. This is peace. This is what winning really looks like. Not revenge, but preservation of what matters most. I've learned that the family we choose is often stronger than the family we're born into. Blood may be thicker than water, but loyalty is thicker than blood. The 200 employees who stood by me, who trusted me to protect their livelihoods, who now own shares in this company, they are my true legacy. Not David, who saw dollar signs where he should have seen human faces. Not Jennifer, who whispered poison into eager ears. But Roberto, Betty, Carlos, and every single person who believes that business can be both profitable and humane. The betrayal taught me something else. Never ignore the whispers of intuition. Every red flag I dismissed, every suspicious moment I explained away, was my heart trying to warn my head. When someone shows you who they really are, through their actions, not their words, believe them the first time. David showed me when he started viewing employees as numbers on spreadsheets. Jennifer showed me when she called me that old woman when she thought I couldn't hear. I wanted so desperately to believe in the son I'd raised that I nearly lost everything I'd built. But perhaps the most important lesson is this. Document everything. Trust, but verify. and never give away your power hoping that others will use it wisely. The safeguards I'd built into the company structure 40 years ago, almost as an afterthought, ended up being my salvation. That boring legal clause about founders' veto rights, those shares I'd held onto despite David's subtle suggestions to transfer them. These weren't just business decisions, they were survival instincts. People sometimes ask if I forgive David. Forgiveness isn't the right word. I've released him, let go of the anger that once burned so hot it could have consumed me. But forgiveness implies a restoration of what was, and that can never be. You can't unknow that your child was willing to destroy you for money. You can't pretend that betrayal didn't happen. What you can do is move forward, build something better from the ashes, and ensure that their betrayal becomes your strength, not your weakness. The young servers here don't know the full story. They just know that Mrs. T saved the company from being sold to a corporation that would have fired half the staff. They know I'm here every morning, remembering their names, asking about their dreams, sometimes quietly paying for their education or their parents' medical bills. They don't need to know that the villain in the story was my own son. Some pain is private, even when its resolution must be public. Yesterday, a young mother applied for a waitress position, recently divorced, 3 kids, desperate for a chance. I hired her on the spot, remembering my own desperation 43 years ago. As I showed her around, she said something that stopped me cold. My ex-husband told me I'd never amount to anything without him. I looked her in the eye and said, "The best revenge is massive success. Build something he could never tear down." So here's my question to you. What would you have done in my position? If your own child, the one you sacrificed everything for, tried to destroy your life's work and legacy, would you have fought back? Would you have chosen your employees, your principles, your life's work over your own flesh and blood? Have you ever had to choose between family and doing what's right? How did you handle betrayal from someone you loved? And if you haven't faced this yet, I hope you never do. But if you do, remember Margaret Thompson, the old woman who refused to be removed from her own table, who refused to let greed win over grace. Share your stories in the comments below. Tell me about a time when you had to stand up against family, when you had to choose between blood and principle. And remember, sometimes the family that matters most isn't the one you were born into, but the one you build with loyalty, respect, and love.